Very
Okay.
give the diagnosis.
Good afternoon and welcome. I think that I just want to confirm that the people on the screen are hearing me. Jean-Yves, Stefan, are you hearing me?
Yes,
Good.
perfectly.
Okay, that is okay. So then I want to welcome everybody, and there are people in the room here at the University Foundation, but there are also people on the virtual call. Welcome people to this. It is the 10th anniversary, I believe, unless I get it wrong, of the state of the EU ETS report, and so it's a little bit of an anniversary. I have to confess that the first reaction is, where did the years go by? But that's okay. That's a different story. And I remind of myself of that because I have a new operation. So 10 years ago, it would have not been a question. Now, obviously, this is where the 10 years have gone. But I started this many years ago, maybe in arrogance a little bit. I always stayed of the sort of the State of the Union. And I saw that it'd be interesting to have a State of the UETS. This was a period, you have to remember, there was a period where people have had enough of ETS discussions. And there was like 2013, 14, they didn't want to talk about ETS. But somehow we persisted, and I was in a different think tank at that time, but I persisted, and I started doing this alone. And then there was another fellow, Vine and Stoops, that came along, and we did it. And then a number of other institutions joined. So here we are 10 years later, and we try to make out of this report something that it's not necessarily a landmark, but it's certainly something that we hope people will keep in somewhere in the back, in the drawer, in case they need a reference, and not necessarily only the European institutions, but people in the Brussels bubble and around Europe. So it's it's an effort that we've put a lot of heart into it, and the partnership that we have today, that has been now for a few years with Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and it's been a very tremendous partnership, and people have changed over the years, but Bloomberg has always been there, and we appreciate that. And then Compass Lexicon, that has joined us more recently. And then we have also Stefan Schleicher, Professor Schleicher at the Veneger Center at the University in Graz, but also our friend Jean-Yves Canet, that has worked with us for a number of years as a senior fellow at ERCST. So this is the team that has worked. Obviously, the team internal in ERCST is Nigel and Pauline, and of course another man that is in the audience that we have to recognize, Juan Lopez, that has now grown to greener pastures. I'm not sure literally greener, but green. He's in the parliament now. So he's found greener pasture than us, but recognizing also the contribution that he has made over the years to this report, and we thank him for that. Now, the way we're going to run this is that I'm going to try and make a presentation, and getting into a detailed presentation, there's I don't know, you can put 50 slides on, and I think you guys are going to get bored, and that's not the point of the exercise. The point is to try and take you through the highlights of this, and then have the opportunity to have a conversation around this, because we have people on the panel here that we really appreciate them taking the time. I know that people are busy these days. This is the end of the month of May and into June. There's a lot of legislative and regulation kind of floating around Brussels. So everybody's busy. So first of all, Mette Quinn for DG Klima. Thank you, Mette. Marge Emerson from the Danish Perm Rep. Liana Guta from Fuels Europe, that we really appreciate all the collaboration that we have over the years, Liana, and thank you very much. And it's not something of today, it's something for many years. And last but not least, which I don't see him, but he will emerge at some point, is Wisdom Beck from Heidelberg Materials. That is, he told us he'll be a few minutes late, but he is coming here. So I will go through initial presentation. I will make appeal to Rosie Finlayson from Bloomberg, and then also to Nigel. So stay awake and stay alert, because when I'm going to turn to you, it's going to be a little bit surprising. I do note that the front row is always empty. I'm not quite sure why people are shy to sit in the front row. But let's go through the presentation again. I will surf through some of it because, again, I can spend the whole 2 hours going through the presentation, but that's not the purpose of the exercise. So the purpose of the exercise is just to tell you that this is, fortunately or unfortunately, the table of contents that has not, it's not that hasn't changed at all, but in general, the big blocks are there. Kind of what is US, what do we define an ETS fit for purpose, regulatory development, and then the 3 KPIs that we'll talk about in a moment. And then at the end, a number of other things, including our market sentiment survey. The market sentiment survey is something that we like. It's not intended to be scientific, but gives a sense, because the people that we approach for it are usually people that are into this business, and you get a sense what people think of. Let's go next quickly. So the context is the context of where we are today, and the fact that yes, ETS, but there is clear industrial focus on industrial transformation, competitiveness, carbon pricing, and decarbonization. As things, especially the competitiveness, is a highlight that has been coming on since the second van der Leyen Commission. Discussion around the future of the EU ETS, and what will be the mandate moving on. But also, while it doesn't affect directly the ETS, does not affect directly the ETS, it will affect volens nolens, climate and policy and reactions around the world. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to jump to attention, but the fact that the United States of America, which is kind of an important player in any economic or environmental or global activity, has chosen to sit out the Paris Agreement, is not something that you can completely neglect. Next, please. Yeah, I told you to stay awake. Okay. Well, the only thing that I want, just one back, the only thing I wanted to say is that in here, you see that there's a whole plethora of policies, EU level policies that are interacting with the ETS. And that has been true for a while. And we have the theory that this is necessary because, and this might not be a nice thing to say, but the sense we have is also the price of the ETS is something that is not necessarily reaching the right levels that should be visible, and that is due to the fact that there are political and economic constraints, and that leads us to have a number of other policies and measures kind of complementing the ETS. But what I will have to say that they're necessary, but there is a point where the balance is beginning to tilt. And I think that one should think whether we're not reaching that point where the beauty, I'm not going to say the big, beautiful bill because somebody else said that, but I would say the beauty of the ETS may start a little bit getting too frayed by a number of other policies. Next, please. And then you have then you have a number of policies that are national policy that are also interacting. German climate contract, Spanish capacity remuneration mechanism are also policies that will interact with the EU ETS and its functioning. Next, please. Now, in terms of regulatory development, the international carbon price market development, I'm not going to go through the EU, through the UK and Brexit implication because we are now kind of coming full circle, thanks God, and we're as ERCST with our modest voice, we salute this. I think it's a very it's great hope the fact that we're getting back to the table to come back and be a whole family yet again, and that is going to solve a lot of problems. So we welcome that, and I'm sure that most people in this room probably do as well. In terms of the Swiss, yes, there is the linking. The Swiss, a functional linking. I'm not sure there's much to say there that is dramatic. Let's move on. And then Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and that this is important for us. This used to be a no-go, used to be a, guys, have you not read the climate law? it is now something that is somewhat under consideration. We see Commissioner Hoekstra, we see prominent member of parliament as Peter Liese, we see the German government speaking about this. How this is going to land, we don't know because this is a process and the policy-making process. But certainly from our side, we have put forward the paper on international credits. We had a discussion here in this building a few weeks ago, and it's something that we are now pursuing in different capitals, in Berlin, in Paris, and other places. There will be a second version. So it's an important thing because Article 6 completion with many of the bells and whistles that the EU liked, I think it's something that will play a role at some point. I mean, it's not going to be the same role as we did in the Kyoto era, but obviously something that people are more open to discussion. Next, please. Now, in terms of the, why don't you take this?
Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
All good. So what we have here is the beginning of all the KPIs that we have in this report. And the first is simply the verified emissions versus the target cap. So the market of the ETS has its target cap, so we do want the reduction, and it is shown in the line right above the emissions. And in the emissions, we have them separated or segmented by different sectors. On the other side, we have the dynamics of emission in industry and versus the combustion sector. So if you can see, the red line is the total emission dynamic reduction, whereas the blue line is the industry versus combustion of fuels. And you can see a big distinction between the combustion of fuels and the industry. And the other part of this is moving the line beyond 2030. So at the bottom of the graph, you can see that the red line stops exactly at 2030. And this is the certainty that we have with the current target. After 2030, we do not know where it's going. We do not know the regulatory certainty of when the cap will end. However, we have presented a sort of target corridor. Whereas with the current trajectory, emissions will lead to zero or around zero to around 2040. However, we would like to keep a sort of certainty barrier beyond this. And again, the emissions are separated by the combustion of fuels versus industrial sectors. And this KPI updated from last year includes the aggregated UK versus EU 27 ETS. So post-Brexit here, we have taken into account the UK leaving the EU ETS.
Thank you. The one thing that we want to note is the fact that we try to develop KPIs in order to have some kind of a way of tracking and having history as best as we can. But again, we'll go quickly. This is something that also Compass has, again, there's no part of this paper that belongs to anybody in particular. Just to make it clear, this is not a part of ERCST and Compass and Bloomberg. We all participated in this, but obviously there are sources, and you see the attribution in here. In this case, is Compass Lexicon. It's something that we've used for a number of years now because we like the evolution of power sector emissions and looking at what are the how we arrived at where arrived today, and the contribution of various shares. Obviously, the renewables has a significant share in the amount of decrease of emission. On the right is the same KPI, but over the years. Next, please. So again, a number of, going to the second part, the three different areas that we judge the ETS to be fit for purpose or not fit for purpose are into the environmental delivery, the social competitiveness, socio-economic, and market functioning. So far we have taken you through the environment. The economic impacts is very much on the number of KPIs. As you can see them here, we'll go them one by one. So next, please. In this case, this is something that Stefan and Stefan Schleicher has worked on, but this is gives you the balance of free allocation minus emissions, and you see that all sectors are in negative starting a few years back, especially on the fuels consumption. But we also see a graph that shows you industrial sectors that have gone negative but then gone back positive in 2024. Next, please. Now, the other very interesting slide that we spend a lot of time working with the sectors, and again, we like to test this thing. We make no secret of it. We like to test this thing with the sectors. We want to make sure if somebody is going to stand up in this room and say this is nonsense, this is not right. Now, it doesn't mean that we take what necessarily they tell us, but that we certainly, as a minimum, have to listen. And so what we see in here is the emission intensity for selected industry sectors. Why? Because in the end, what does the ETS do its job is in the emission intensity. It is not, we're not here to deindustrialize by shutting down and reducing emissions, absolute emission. We're here to actually, the real KPI for us is the emission intensity. And we do see a general trend in emission intensity going down. On the right-hand side, again, we try to get an explanation as to why we see these curves, and we've put this, we put that explanation on the right-hand side. Each of them have their own particularities, and each sector will have different explanation and different logic as to what happened. Now, in the case, for instance, in the case of steel, GHG emission and production decreased in parallel, mainly due to the dynamics, international trade, and high energy cost in Europe. Abatement options are highly CapEx and OpEx intensive. So for each of them, there will be a rationale as to what happened. Next, please. Now, again, we'll skip this one because this is something that we're trying to look at and look at comparing the price. Can you go back for a second? Comparing the price of EUAs to prices in other emission trading system. And frankly, if you look at it, you will see that the price in the ETS is significantly higher than in other ETSs. There should be some adjustment made on the basis of GDP per capita. I don't know, all kinds of things, but as an absolute number, this is not something that you can argue with. It's just reality, and it's a reality that we have to face and stare in the face. Next, please. Now, Peter, may I ask you to take us through this, because these are these are economic impacts, and there are things that you guys have been working on, and I think you're better suited and better placed than me to give an explanation for these. Okay, we don't need to go through each of them, but just kind of explain the sense.
Yeah, thank you, Andre. Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here with you. I hope you can hear me well. So what we tried to do this year, which is different from previous iterations of the report, is to kind of establish or try to depict a correlation between possible EU ETS costs and energy costs with the evolution of industrial performance in terms of production, as well as trade volumes, be it imports or exports. Now, a quick comment is that this is our first effort, and we aim to refine it through future iterations of the report. But what we came up to as a conclusion while we were doing the exercise is that actually there's no simple causality between the EU ETS compliance costs and, let's say, industrial competitiveness as a whole and the evolution of the industrial production and trade volumes. So what we tried to establish here is a rough estimation of, let's say, direct ETS costs without accounting for indirect costs, as well as marginal costs, but just having a rough representation of the direct compliance costs the sectors are subject to under the EU ETS, as well as showing for example, for average energy costs on a sector level brought down to a unitary production, and then kind of map the evolution of these costs against the evolution of trade and output volumes for different sectors. And the idea of this exercise was trying to come up with some key takeaways on a possible correlation between the cost elements and the performance elements. And what we can see very roughly throughout this slide and the next is that overall we can see kind of that EU production has kind of decreased since 2018 for most sectors, except glass here. And that there has been some kind of correlation, especially with the energy crisis in recent years and more globally with the evolution of the EU ETS price since 2018. And that there has been also one of the key takeaways, there has been also a decrease in the domestic dependence on EU production to satisfy EU demand. And this could be maybe further highlighted in recent years, the competitive pressures from international players that do not face as high as carbon prices as the EU. So this is kind of the logic we had while developing the analysis.
Thank you, Peter. Look, this was kind of brainstorm, and we started, how do we let's test and see what happens. Let's see what data we get. And frankly, data is more convoluted, and usually when you put data like this on the board, and then you have to explain it, while it doesn't always come up with what you expect it to come, then you have a problem. But we saw that we intellectually honest on our part to, even though the data is much more, how should I put it, much more convoluted, much more difficult to understand, we saw that at least for the first year, we'd like to put it on, see what the reaction is, have a discussion, and we'll see what we do next year. But the initial idea, obviously, the expectation was that, hey, your cost of compliance increased, then you see a reaction in export, you see a reaction in import, you see a reaction in production. Again, it doesn't always quite align. There's a time lag in all these things. There's COVID that came in, so there's a lot of stuff that sometimes, again, you have to give an explanation, which is less satisfactory. But let's move on. And okay, and now we get into the the auction revenue and how that is being used. So this is the amount of phase 4 total revenue, 112.8 billion, with 88 billion going to the member states. So this is quite a significant amount. I mean, this reminds us that the EU ETS is a source of revenue, and the revenue is being used hopefully in the right way. Let's move on. And yep. So the reported auction revenue per category, because now we have following 2023, we have to report on the for the revenue use. So we are now split, as you can see, over a number of areas, and that gives you a little bit of a sense of where the money goes through. We would, some of it is very small, road transport and adaptation, and unfortunately, again, we had a session, very interesting session, the other day at the Bavarian representation here with Professor Fust from IFO, which he insisted very much that adaptation has to play a bigger role. So far we see very little for the adaptation. We see most of stuff in energy supply, grid, and storage. Next, please. And this is by, the revenue used by states. So we see where the money comes in. That's quite expected. Germany, Poland, Spain. I mean, this is where most of the revenue comes in. Next, please. And then now the other thing that you talk about, the modernization fund, I'll pass it on to you very quickly, but let's not spend too much time.
Okay, so for the modernization fund, we have allocated amount of money that goes to the 13 low-income member states, right? And as we can see, for the first time in 2024, Romania has surpassed Czechia as the main beneficiary, which has received 1.9 billion euros. However, overall, Poland and Czechia and Romania still remain the top 3. So same as last year, however, Romania overtook. Mind you, the modernization fund is still very important for the Eastern European countries, as this helps to decarbonize more efficiently from the high carbon energy sector to a lower carbon energy sector. And for the other fund, I will move on to the innovation fund. For 2024, the main highlight is going to be that pink little section in the 4th bar chart, which is the hydrogen. Money for innovation in hydrogen has, for the 2024, been the #1 receiving end. And this is mainly due to the hydrogen bank. This is a trend we think will increase in the future. And since 2021, the number one sector was cement and lime. So now hydrogen last year has overtaken cement and lime. On the right-hand side are the projects by member state. And in 2024, what we see and what we experience for the first time are member states applying for projects in partnership. So previously, our innovation fund projects went to a single member state. However, in 2024, we see partnerships, for example, between Spain and Germany, Denmark, France and Germany, France and the Netherlands, of a cross-border interaction to innovate.
Good. Now, I'm kind of taking call to Newcastle is probably wrong. So I'll pass it on to Rosie because this is the part that Bloomberg has focused on. Obviously, most of their expertise, not only exclusively, but on market functioning, they have better than we do.
Yeah, sure. So each year for
The only thing is that you're going to have to speak very close to the mic because it's a very nice venue, beautiful place, but the mics are very particular, actually.
okay, hopefully you can all hear me a little bit clearer now. But yes, my name is Rosie and I'm from Bloomberg NEF. So we report, or we contribute towards this report in terms of market functioning KPIs. So we generally add 8 metrics each year. And this year we added an additional metric being liquidity. So this is basically the summary metric of all these 8 metrics in the table that you can see. So liquidity is at the bottom over there, highlighted in bold. So it just summarizes those all. And what we saw in 2024 was an improvement in liquidity. So if we just go through the individual indicators, we can see that we can just go to the next slide. So the traded volume in the futures basically increased by a third to 9.7 billion EUAs. So this is quite a significant pickup, but looks like it's mostly been driven by speculation. And then the only metric, so we can go to the next slide again. So the only metric to see a decline was open interest. So we saw a 20% decrease year on year. Open interest basically denotes the total number of outstanding contracts that are held by market participants at the end of the day. And this looks to be mainly a function of the weak demand supply fundamentals, so underlyingly. If we go on to the next, for auction participation, we saw an increase. So this is just the count of the number of participants that participate in the daily auctions on EEX, and participation rose to 23.6 from 20.1. So also looks to be driven by financials mainly. Then for the next 3 metrics, so if we look at auction coverage, so this is basically a ratio that reflects the total number of bids in an auction divided by the number of available EUAs. So it compares supply and demand. So when I say supply and demand, I really mean auction demand. And we saw that this was around 1.73, so relatively stable year on year. And this is mainly because, well, it's less than 2. So this indicates that some market participants can exercise some power in the market ultimately. Then if we look at auction versus spot spread, so this was also relatively stable. And when I mean stable, it does show a slight decrease. But if we look at comparison to 2022 levels, so you can go to, the next slide to show this here. Okay, so this is not shown here at the moment, but it's 2024, it does show a slight decrease, but comparison to 2022, it's not anything significant. So that's why we kept this stable. And then in terms of cost of carry, so this is basically the difference between the price of an allowance in the spot market and the futures market. So looks at the premium that market participants put on the carbon price looking forward, and that looks relatively stable as well. In terms of the ask bid spread, so this is the difference between the minimum and the maximum price at the end of the day at market close. We saw that so it did decrease a little bit, which shows some improvement as well. And then if we go to our last metric on volatility, we saw that that was relatively stable as well. So it was 32% in 2023, and then this increased to 36%. So very small, minor change. And the reason why we saw a slight uptick is because we saw that there was some political elections, as well as on top of that, there were some movements in adjacent markets, such as the gas market. So overall, we saw that liquidity had showed an improvement because of these metrics, as I say. And this is despite that there was some outstanding policy decisions which could have thrown cold water on the market, but really we saw that the market was quite relatively unfazed by it. And then I see here that you have our price forecasts. So we look at, I don't know if I should hand over to you.
No, you're right.
Okay, so in terms of our price forecasts, we look at price forecasts from a number of different agencies and compare them to just understand the trajectory going forward and what the consensus looks like in the market. So generally, what we see is a pickup in prices for this year, and overall, there's a consensus that prices will rise to over 120 euros per metric ton by 2030.
Okay, thank you, Rosie. Can we now move on to the, yeah. Look, I'm not going to take you through every question in here, but I think there are a couple of them I'd like to highlight that probably relevant. One of them is that, you know, the statement was that the ETS provides signal for decarbonization to 2030. And there seems to be an overwhelming opinion or sense, if you want, that that is the case. So we're looking at almost like 70% or 75%. So that's a pretty high percentage, you know. So, you know, the people that work on this seem to think that this is the case. Now, but on the other hand, there also seems to be a belief that is about 90% that to examine decarbonization, the driver post 2030, that's also a very high percentage. So while most respondents felt to 2030 were okay, that post 2030 is something that we need to think about. And I'm not quite sure why my machine is doing this, but it's doing it. Now, the other thing is the also very interesting, we ask a question with a provocative, what is the level of the target of the 2040? It's not necessarily in ETS, but what the heck, why not? And we see that there is about half of the respondents felt that somewhere between 80 and 90 is what we're seeing. There are outliers, 20% on 75 to 80 and more than 90. So, but between 80 and 90, frankly, is not granular enough. It could be 81, could be 89. So, but in any case, that's kind of what we. The other question is the sense whether the CBAM and ETS are providing competitiveness, addressing the competitive concern of industry, and in this case, there seems to be quite a significant number of respondents that have difficulty with the statements. Vicente or Gerasimos or Astrid are not here today, but we obviously will share that with GD Taxud as well. And next, the question was, should we delay CBAM? The answer seems to be an overwhelming no. So I think that would make Vicente very happy. Now, let me go to the last slide because I think we're taking longer than I wanted to. And the takeaway really is that we are in a very volatile situation. We obviously coming from the Green Deal, but now we got the Draghi report, the Andrew Declaration. There is a sense that something needs to be done to address competitiveness. And that is something that the new ETS or the ETS, the way it functions and will continue to function, is an important sense. But there is going to be uncertainty. You know, there is a stakeholder consultation that the Commission has put out, responding in July sometime. And that obviously signals the start, you know, from the block start of another long conversation, which provides some level of uncertainty, even though in general we know the direction of travel. The direction of travel has stayed the same, but nevertheless, there is going to be some issue on that. One thing that is a little bit disconcerting at times is the fact that, yes, we applaud the drop of emission, but there are the concern that part of this reduction comes from lower production output, which is not what we want. We would like to see a disconnect between the decoupling between these two, but there seems to be a connection between these two. We talked about the market sentiment survey. We talked about market functioning, which market functioning seems to be continue to be okay, doesn't seem to be an issue for concern. But obviously there is now in this end of second half of the 20s, and as we move on towards carbon neutrality, net negative in the future, a need to examine how we're going to go. And there are, for instance, today there are discussion on CRCF, there are discussion international, there are all kind of issues, as we should have this conversation. I'll stop here because we are way too long, and I apologize for this. We try to be short, but it's only so much we can do. I will now switch over to Mette, Marj, Liana, and Winston for their reaction, and then a conversation.
Yes, thank you very much. Is it on?
It should be on. Jair, can you hear?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Good. So thank you very much for inviting me today, and thank you for the presentation of your report, and congratulations to all the authors for providing it. This report always helps understanding the ETS, so it's always greatly appreciated that you prepare this. We like to read it and like to see your findings. We're also going to publish the Commission's annual report on the functioning on the ETS, the carbon market report. It's coming out in October. So it's a different report. Both of them are important. This is your independent view, and it's nice to have to discuss on the ETS. So you all know that the Commission is very fond of saying that the ETS is a cornerstone of EU climate policy, and it continues to deliver on its reputation. And I'm also very glad to see that the report acknowledges this or confirms this. The report shows that we are well on track to reduce emissions with 62% by 2030 compared to 2005. And the verified emissions for 2024 show that we have now reached a 50% reduction since 2005. So we are halfway, and we are doing very well. So while the ETS is not the only driver of the emissions reduction, it's clear that it does play a major role in driving the mitigation where it's most cost effective. So we can clearly see it has helped driving the uptake in renewable energy, together with complementary support policies at EU and member state level. And it has also helped drive coal out of the electricity market. Your market survey also confirms this point, and 90% of the respondents were agreeing that the current ETS as it is provides decarbonization signals until 2030. So very good, and thank you for providing this insight. I'm also very pleased to see that the market functioning indicators, they all appear to be in good shape, showing that the market is healthy and stable. And this is also consistent with the view that we get from the European Securities and Market Authorities, the ESMA, that have the responsibility to review the transparency and the integrity of the EU carbon market and we have strengthened that function since the 2023 review. There are also some challenges that you're pointing out in your report that we also agree with. So the first one is on post-2030. You make a strong point that stakeholders want to have greater clarity on post-2030 climate policy. For that, it's very important to have a 2040 target, and we fully agree on that. We would very much like to see a swift adoption of a 2040 target and a new EU NDC under the Paris Agreement very soon. And then when it comes to the review of the ETS for the post-2030 period here, the work is well underway, and I think everyone is aware. We released the public consultation, as you mentioned, in April, and it's open until 8th of July, and we really hope everyone or many will contribute. It's very important for the evaluation and for the preparation of the review. It's coming, the review, in July 2026. The timing, the mandate, we are expecting to do as told. We are preparing for this. It will cover a number of different topics that we are all very aware of. So the potential extension to carbon removals, to include waste incineration and how to have non-permanent CCU accounted for, but we will also look at the market stability reserve, whether it's fit for purpose, and the free allocation, whether that is fit for purpose and how we do that. And that leads to competitiveness. So you mentioned also the competitiveness challenges, the Draghi report, the Clean Industrial Deal. Here, it's also the Commission's strong focus on how to build a business case for industrial decarbonization. The figures, as you show them, indeed could be better, but also something is happening. So we are developing the action plan on affordable energy, which is clearly needed for industry. And we are looking really at ways to increase the annual investments in energy and transport systems, as well as in industry. There is a big investment need, an increase of 480 billion euro compared to the previous decade. So there is a big burden. And what do? We are trying to develop lead markets for decarbonized industrial products, such as steel and cement. And we are also trying to develop a voluntary label for steel that's based on ETS data. And then we are also introducing a Circular Economy Act to better promote free movement of circular products, secondary raw materials, and waste. So there are a number of things, and in the Clean Industrial Deal, under that, we will build up the new Industrial Decarbonization Bank that will also be part of the 2026 review. Here, we don't have all the details of what that will mean, but it will definitely build on the experiences of the Innovation Fund that is very successful, many projects. We have also launched auctions as a service concept. And we will fund this new bank with a mix of elements. Some come from InvestEU, so public-private funding. Some come from the Innovation Fund, where we already have a pilot this year, and some will come from revenues. Another element, it was not really touched that much, but the carbon border adjustment mechanism will enter into force in 2026. You were mentioning that in the survey, and I'm very pleased to see this, that on the one hand, and this is a question now I launched back maybe to you, that on the one hand, the respondents said that ETS and CBAM do not adequately address the risk of carbon leakage. On the other hand, they want to enter into force on time. So what is the message here? But I'm glad to see that there's a strong majority for entering the CBAM into to force on time. We have proposed to simplify the CBAM, and we will also come with more proposals for extending its scope and to downstream products, and also how to address carbon leakage risk for the export sectors. Now I come to the last point I want to mention before I pass on the floor. That's on ETS implementation. It's going well. We are on track. We are also launching the new Social Climate Fund, very important to address the social aspects of the new ETS2. And here, this will be financed from mainly ETS2 revenue, so clearly a polluter pays principle in action. You mentioned the revenues, very strong revenue generation, more than 200 billion. And I'm also glad to see that you have been looking into how member states have reported on the use of the revenues. We would also like to strengthen that reporting so we get more clarity on what that's delivering, as it's a very important source of funding for the decarbonization. So to conclude, I think we can say that we have managed to maintain the reputation of the EU ETS. We are on track to meet our 2030 target. We're sending a clear carbon pricing signal. There are some We have also now concluded that we would like to look into possible linking. It's on track, but you have also reminded us that there are some major challenges that we need to address in the 2026 review. We are fully aware of this. For us, what is important is certainty in the market, competitiveness, decarbonization, and social fairness. And these are all firmly on the agenda for the review that we are undertaking right now. And then I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. And indeed, a very interesting fork in the answer. But I think there are people here on the panel that may be able to answer because there were some of them are in the survey. I will give you maybe our view, but I think that we better let others. Mark, I'll come to you and then Liana.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to speak here today.
We caught you just before you get very busy.
Well, it's only 6 weeks away that we take over the presidency, so I think very busy has started already. But nevertheless, I am very happy to be here. And thank you so much for this very interesting report. It is a great way to get a sort of to take the temperature of the market on a yearly basis, and I very much agree with Mette that it's complementary to the report coming from the Commission. So it's always great to hear several different ideas and views on the market. Now turning to the issue at hand here, the ETS is the most successful climate tool that we have in the climate toolbox, so to say. As Mette says, it has driven down emissions by half since 2005 in the sectors covered. I think that is quite astounding, to be honest. I think it's a tool that is cost efficient, it's transparent, it's effective, it's market based, and it creates a lot of revenue for climate investments. It has taken time to build. The Rome wasn't built in a day. We have been through many phases here, and I am not saying that the tool is perfect, but I think we've come a long way. I think also what this report shows is that the market does work, and there's a great confidence in the market overall. So I think, as Mette says, this is the cornerstone of EU climate policy, and I think we should maintain the integrity of that for as long as possible, also because it is a market-based tool, which for us is to be preferred over more intervention-based policies. Why does the ETS work? It works because it provides a strong, predictable price signal. That is also the goal. That should always be the goal. Of course, this requires policy stability, both before and after 2030. We've seen some parts of the political spectrum taking up issue with some of the climate policies that we have agreed to. I think from our point of view, we should stick to what we have agreed to. Because of the policy predictability is very important here. But of course, as Ms. Mette also said, I mean, we could have written each other's speaking points on some issues. This requires predictability also on the 2040. And of course, we are very, very excited to take this forward and see how we will manage to have an agreement on the 2040 target within the coming time. And of course, we need this for the stability of the overall, for the signal of the overall target. But of course, we also need it to be able to steer the direction of the upcoming review in 2026. Without a decision on the 2040 target, this will be quite difficult. So what is up for the next phase of the ETS? Of course, it must contribute to the 2040 target. We're very excited to see what Commission comes up with here. We all know the things that we have to look at in the upcoming review. Of course, for us, the matter of negative emission is something that's quite dear to our hearts, and we would very much like to see that included in the future. We are also quite keen on merging ETS 1 and 2 in future. Let's see how that. Sorry. Nope. I don't know. Okay, I will put the mic even closer to my mouth. I will try. Thank you for letting me know. Please let me know if it's a problem again. Good. Yes, as I said, the ETS is by far the most effective tool that we have in the climate toolbox, and for that reason, it's the Danish position that we would also like to see this sort of tool expanded to other sectors. As many of you know, we have recently agreed to a green tripartite agreement in Denmark where we put a price signal on agricultural emissions. This is something that we would also like to see in one way or another for more of the EU. I also just quickly want to touch upon the issue of international credits, as you said, Andre. It's something that is popping up in the debate here and there. Let's see where we go. We are probably one of the member states that are a bit more cautious on this, because we do have some experiences from earlier that were not too great, and we are very aware of the fact that this is a new mechanism. We need to see how it develops. There are many things that are yet unknown, and even though it might seem like of course, on the surface, it's a great idea, and it is a great idea, and of course, we are very much proponents of international carbon markets in general. I think we need to be honest about the fact that it is something new. We're still working on it. We're still developing it, and that's why we're a little bit cautious. And then just quickly on the CBAM, because the question is, of course, how much do we need complementary policies here? And I think from the Danish perspective, complementary policies are very, very important. This is sectoral policies. One thing that has been mentioned in the report is the CBAM, which I agree with Mette. What is the signal in terms of respondents saying that that it should not be postponed, but at the same time that it's not sufficient? I think perhaps the message could be like the ETS. It's not a silver bullet, and it might not be perfect from the beginning. We will have to develop and adjust accordingly. And of course, it might not be the only thing that's needed. We might need complementary policies on that part as well. I think I will keep it to that for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and apologies for these mics that are not working as per standards. Liana and Winston, I think that first of all, I think there's a loaded question on CBAM, so I think that probably you may have to say something about it. I'm happy to answer, but I think you're probably better answering yourselves. But also, again, both representing people that are active and covered by the EU ETS, so we're talking about real life, real experiences. Liana, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Andre. I hope that you can hear me well. First of all, let me thank you for this invitation, for having me here. It's a real pleasure, and especially given the fact that we celebrate the 10th anniversary of this publication, which became, I would say, a flagship publication as well, together with the report that we always have from the Commission. I would say it is a reference benchmark, a reference publication, and it is an ideal way to start the discussion around whether the EU ETS is fit for purpose, and of course, the second very important topic, how we can strengthen this EU ETS. And this discussion, this debate could not be more timely, given the fact that we are in the middle of this open consultation, and also within the next year, next summer, we expect to have the new review of the ETS. So it is the ideal time to discuss the strong and the weak points, and the points that need to be, the challenges that need to be addressed. I will bring to the table the perspective of our industry, the refining industry, an energy-intensive industry, and one of the hard-to-abate sectors. As an industry, we fully support the ambition of climate neutrality and also the targets of Fit for 55 by 2030. And we believe that in order to achieve this ambition, we will need breakthrough technologies, significant investments, and also, of course, an enabling legislative framework. Coming now to the ETS, there is no doubt, as already said, that this is a flagship policy, European policy, and it is a market-based instrument. It was a pioneering policy for the EU. And not to forget also that it is a technology neutral policy instrument, which for us is very important. So going back to 2005, when it all started, the EU ETS was expected to create a global carbon price market to enable the climate action in an efficient way, to achieve a level playing field on an international level, and also, of course, to reduce the carbon leakage risk, which is very important for all industries. Now, 20 years later, we can say that some of these targets have been met, some of them need to be improved. And I would say that we feel that nowadays the EU ETS operates, I would say, in an isolated landscape in Europe, where we see rising carbon prices, which is not the case for our competitors in other areas of the world. And so far we have significant reductions in sectors such as the power sector, as already mentioned. But this is not the case for the hard-to-abate sectors. And let us not forget that the power sector does not have these carbon leakage risk at the same level as the rest of the energy-intensive industries and the hard-to-abate sectors, as I said. Coming to our sectors and to refining specifically, we are afraid that the EU ETS, as it is today, it might fail to provide us with a viable business case in order to proceed with all the investments that we will need in order to transform and deliver the renewable fuels and products that will be needed to achieve the climate, the European climate ambition. Following the 2023 review, we all know that we now have this cap on emissions that should go down to 0 by 2039, and which means that we will have no new allowances, neither from free allocation, neither from auctions. And the current trajectory, we believe, makes things very challenging for industries such as our industry. And we believe that the way it is right now, the EU ETS may not be viable, may not be sustainable for the coming years, and we definitely need to address other parameters. Because we need to protect the industrial base of Europe. We need to provide certainty, like regulatory certainty and clarity. This is very important for the next 15 years, I would say. And right now we don't have this clarity. And as we all know, our industries need this clarity in order to make decisions, investment decisions today, in order to be able to deliver the products and they need to deliver within the next 10 to 15 years. For our sector, as I said, we need to produce at scale renewable fuels and products in the coming years. And this will support not only the decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors, transport, and other strategic industrial sectors, but also will enhance the energy security. But our sector realizes that we are lacking a strong business case. The EU ETS is supposed to incentivize not only decarbonization, because definitely we need to reduce CO2 emissions, but we also need to keep production in Europe. We need to incentivize investments, and we need to incentivize transformation of our industry and our manufacturing capacity. We should avoid deindustrialization and shutdown of industrial sites, and we should address energy security concerns. Therefore, there are new parameters on the table that need to be addressed, such as the industrial competitiveness, as has already been mentioned. We need clear investment signals, and of course, we need to support innovation. For that, we need an enabling framework which supports both competitiveness and decarbonization. And if we have to answer the question, what can we do in order to improve the current ETS? And if we apply these measures to improve ETS, would that be enough? Well, the answer to the first part would be that there are many things and many ideas. Some of them were already mentioned regarding carbon removals, international credits that can address the concerns of market liquidity and can incentivize technologies that can lead us to net zero. We believe that we definitely need to keep incentivizing the production of renewable fuels from captured CO2 by providing also regulatory stability and also providing coherence among all relevant legislation, such as RED Directive and RED rules. Of course, ensuring the carbon leakage protection is one of the major goals within the EU ETS. And I would like to remind you that regarding our sector, the free allocation balance is not in favor of our sector because the fourth trading period started with a very significant shortfall of allowances, about 35% on average. And we also see that the current pathway with some, I would say, unrealistic tightening of benchmarks and the implementation of CSCF does not give the carbon leakage protection that we would expect for our sector. And as long as it concerns CBAM, we support the idea, of course, and the policy, but we need that in order to say that it is fit for purpose, we need to also address the export dimension, which is not included yet. And coming to the question, if we do all this and we really improve the EU ETS, would that be enough? Our question is that the ETS on its own is not enough. We definitely need complementary measures in order to address the competitive issues that we mentioned earlier, and in order to establish demand-side measures. EU ETS is a great instrument to support supply side, the supply side, but we also need to support demand side with the relevant measures. And we can say that lead markets can play a great role together with emission standards of low carbon products, carbon contracts for difference, recycling of ETS revenues to support OPEX and CAPEX in new investments, other demand-side measures such as public procurement, labeling. Of course, taxation can play a really significant role by reducing taxation for the renewable and the low carbon products and fuels in our case. And as for our sector, more specific demand measures can be measures to support our access to new renewable feedstocks, infrastructures, logistics for these new feedstocks that we will need. So there are many things that need to be addressed. EU ETS is a great tool, I would say, and I will stop it here because we will have the opportunity to continue the discussion. We definitely believe that EU ETS is a great policy and a great instrument, but we need to look forward. We need to provide the industry with the stability it needs. And we need to take into account all these new parameters like competitiveness and investment signal and support of innovation that became so relevant lately under the Clean Industrial Deal, the Antwerp Declaration, and following the recommendations of Draghi report.
Thank you, Liana. So part of the answer that we heard from the CBAM, because I think somebody, Mette, and I think Marty, you raised this, it seems to be that, yes, it's good, but not complete. But Winston, from your side, your installations have been part of the ETS from the very beginning.
All right, can you hear me?
I would suggest you get it closer. Yeah, take it like that.
All right. All right, can you hear me now? Also in the back? Perfect. All right. So thanks also for the invitation and indeed very interesting report. I'm not sure I got over the executive summary, but I will definitely have a more in-depth look. And yeah, I mean, it's difficult actually to follow up on everything which was already said because I think a lot of the points I wanted to raise also were already mentioned. So maybe quickly to us, for those who don't know us, Winston Beck working for Heidelberg Materials. We are around about the second biggest producer of cement and concrete in the world, and the biggest producer in Europe with around 25% of the market share. And for that discussion, maybe of interest that we have 42 ETS installations in the EU across 22 markets. So we are definitely one of the key players in the EU ETS. And as you may know, I mean, cement production is an emission and energy intensive process, right? We are 8% of emissions globally in our sector, and I guess that more or less resembles also our emission portion in the EU, and that means we are part of the problem, but of course we also would like to be part of the solution. And we do have a sector roadmap which brings us to net zero. And as Heidelberg Materials, we also want really to lead in the decarbonization. And I think we can show that what we have done over the past years also really brings us to one of the pioneering spots. So just to give you an example, we have reduced our emissions globally from 2020 to 2024 by 8% globally. We have the target to reduce globally our emissions by 47% compared to 1990 in 2030, which is a 24% improvement from 2020 to 2030. So that's really quite massive. And we will also be the first company actually in 4 weeks from now to offer the first net zero cement on the market worldwide. We have a range of technologies which we are going to deploy. Some of them are more the traditional decarbonization levers, like defossilization, using our products more efficiently and using alternative raw materials. But I fully agree that we also need to have this deep decarbonization technology and breakthrough technologies. One of them would be electrification of our kilns. The other one, especially for the cement industry, is also carbon capture, storage, and utilization, because around 40% of our emission from our industry we cannot reduce. So we need to capture it and store it under the ground or use it potentially in products. I said that we reduced our emissions by 8% globally since 2020. And when I now look at our European market, I must say that the number is more or less the same. Even though we have in Europe the ETS, we also believe that the ETS is indeed a cornerstone policy, and we are very much in favor of carbon pricing systems. But it is a fact that the reduction so far was mainly driven by the power sector, mainly through the rollout of wind and solar. And yes, there were also reductions coming from the industry side, but that was primarily through efficiency improvements and also, unfortunately, driven to some extent by decreased output, especially through the energy crisis and also COVID. And going forward, I think what we would expect is that the reduction in the power sector will also slow down to some extent, because, of course, the low-hanging fruits are harvested. There is the need for a specific for some base load, and also there are some hard-to-reduce volumes left. If you look, for example, at Poland, so it's very clear that in order to reach the EU targets for 2030 and beyond, the industry also needs to start to deliver considerably more to the reduction. Now, why hasn't the ETS on the industry side delivered as much than on the power side? I think there are multiple factors to it. One of them is that at the moment it's clear that we have a carbon price which is too low to trigger investments in these deep decarbonization technologies I mentioned. Currently, we have a carbon price of around 70 euros per ton CO2. If we look, for example, at our, I don't want to talk about kiln electrification because that's still very, very early stage. But if we look at carbon capture and storage, for example, we will add costs around 120 to 250, maybe 300, depending on where the plant is located, euros per ton of CO2 reduced. And that is, of course, 3-4 times the amount of what we are seeing for the CO2 price at the moment. So there's absolutely no business case without public support for these types of projects at the moment. And that is, of course, also what the financial markets see, which in the end should mobilize the private investments. And combined with the low prices, of course, we also, I think, have still not the predictability which we need to get the confidence of the markets, which is partly because there have been changes over time through the ETS systems. There have also been some inclusions which we do not agree with, where it could be simplified, such as the bonus-malus system, for example. But also, I think the bigger question is indeed looking forward. So what will happen with the EU ETS post 2030? What about the 2040 target? And also a big question for us, of course, is what happens with the EU ETS in 2039 when the LRF leads to the allowances to zero. That being said, it is the most advanced carbon pricing system in the world. We believe that carbon pricing system as such are the right way forward to also drive emission reductions in the industry. I think what we need, a lot of those things have already been mentioned, is what I just said. We need a clear trajectory. So we need to have answers to what happens after 2030. And I think it's very important to have a very solid mandate by the council that these policies will also be implemented as agreed. I fully agree on a few improvements which have been mentioned. We need to look at the question of carbon removals and negative emissions. Our industry as well. I mean, we are replacing a lot of the fossil fuels with alternative fuels and biomass, and with that we would then also produce carbon removals, and it would of course be an improvement to the business case if we then also can monetize those. And the other point would be that we should also harmonize some of the CO2 accounting. It was already mentioned that now the permanent CO2 saved in the products is already been included in the ETS since the last review, but we also need to look at the non-permanent products when we look, for example, at innovative plastics or also fuels. At least we need to make sure that there's some sort of a business case also in Europe for these types of projects. Otherwise, they will certainly develop elsewhere, but not in the EU. I mentioned that from the business case for the next, I think, 10 to 15 years, this breakout period until we reach an economic of scale, until we have the market for low carbon products, and until the infrastructure is being built, we need to have public support for the deep decarbonization projects. The Innovation Fund is a fantastic tool, and to be honest, it's the only funding program we have at European level which supports our industry with the decarbonization. Our technologies are not covered by Recovery EU. It's not covered by most of the Just Transition and the Modernization Fund. So we very much focus on the Innovation Fund, and that's why also cement and lime has been quite successful in the past with the Innovation Fund. That being said, I think a very small portion of that has actually been paid out. I mean, it has been allocated, but it has not yet been paid out because the projects have many other barriers to face. And also it's a very small share of the projects we actually need to implement in order to reach the 2030 targets. So I think the Industrial Decarbonization Bank is a great idea. We need to see how it's being implemented. My call here to the Commission would be that if it's similar to a competitive pricing or CCFD schemes, we need to have some element where it's sector or technology specific, and looking at the different amortization costs of the industries and the cost of the technologies. CBAM was mentioned. CBAM is absolutely important for our industry. We as the cement and concrete industry have supported CBAM from the very start. We also are more optimistic that for our sector it will work. But that being said, there are issues we need to work on. We fully agree that there needs to be solutions on the exports. We also need to look at the reshuffling question. So when markets outside the EU would decarbonize 1 or 2 plants and then import the products from only these 1 or 2 plants to the EU. And there, I think a solution can be found with the default values. And that is really important. And there we believe there's not enough focus being put on. We need to work with the national customs to make sure that there are also the check and balances in place, that these are being implemented, and to ensure that the CBAM reports which are being issued actually contains the information of the products which are then actually shipped to the EU. And I'm not sure if it's correct, but I heard that the controls today are 1 or 2% of everything which is being imported. So that is, of course, not sufficient. And then just to finalize, what we also need is demand and infrastructure rollout. For our industry, I mean, we are energy intensive. Currently, we pay 2 to 3 times the price of the markets outside the EU. And that is not compared. I'm not comparing it with the US, for example. I'm comparing it with Turkey, Algeria, Morocco, which are our direct neighbors and which are actually importing clinker, which is the pre-product, and cement into the EU. So it's always said that our product is not so trade intensive, but we have seen imports going up by 560% over the last 5 years into the EU of these types of products. So we need to really work on the energy prices in order to be competitive. And here we don't yet see a solution in the affordable energy plan, which was put forward, but happy to debate about that. And finally, the demand for low carbon products is absolutely key as well. We need to inform our customers that these products are coming to the market, and that they need also to prepare, because sometimes they have different performance or also need to be used in a bit of a different way. And this awareness is still quite low. If we look at procurement, the main factor is the pricing. So we would fully support having maybe a bit more transparency through CO2 labels, but more importantly is revising procurement rules to implement additional criteria in terms of performance and sustainability.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much, also Winston. So indeed, the ETS is working right now. I think that what you hear a lot is that it is fit for the moment, but in the end, there's an end game where there's a need for a number of things to come together. And the demand part of it seems to be critical. You know, somebody's going to have to bite the bullet at some point and say some words that probably are not going to be politically very, very pleasant and very, very good. But it doesn't look like there's any other way. And then there's other instruments that coming around. You know, the CBAM in its current impersonation, together with other instruments. So all in all, I think that we are in a period that what we look for is having a good look at this consultation that is out there, and that is going to launch us in the next discussion, because there will be answers. I mean, don't kid yourself. There will be answers. They may not be now, and they may be in 2026, 2026 and a half, 27, but there will be answers. And for those of you who say, well, listen, we just found out there are no allowances in 2039. Well, somebody should have figured that one out about 30 years ago in Kyoto. But that is going to happen. I'm sorry to say this, but somebody should have figured that one out. So yes, we are in, you make sure what you ask for, because you may get it. Because you ask for answers, you'll get answers. The question, would you like the answers? So that's the next thing. Now, I'd like to open it to people on the screen, but also the people in the room. If you want to raise your hand, if you are on the screen, I would appreciate it. In the room, just raise your hand and we'll get you the microphone very, very, very quickly. There's there's Maria Christina in the back, and then the lady here, and you. So Fabrizio, can we get the mic first of all? And then I'm looking also on the screen. I think probably no, go to Maria Christine first. And then also we have Jean-Yves and Stefan that have patiently waited. I didn't give you the floor again. I apologize for this because I felt that the presentation was too long and we're supposed to kind of give but we'll come back to you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. And thank you once again, as everyone said, great to have this report. It's a great basis for discussion. Also really helpful, as mentioned, that you have the revenues spread out. I think will be interesting to see if we see more shift in the coming years towards spending some of the revenues on industrial decarbonization as we move towards that becoming the market setter. And also, I think very important, infrastructure spending. I always think we should consider spending revenues, I suppose, more on infrastructure, given the multiplier effect it would have. I think just one point on CBAM, since you asked, I think it was touched upon a little bit by both Heidelberg Cement and Fuels Europe. This is a highly sector-specific issue. I think there are some key aspects, such as exports, I think solution that we would all agree on, but whether or not it makes sense for a sector, it looks completely different whether you talk about CBAM for chemicals or CBAM for cement. In terms of specific questions, I do have one for May, if I may. In terms of your comments on the integration of, or potential integration of international credits into a compliance market, I fully agree with you that you need to have strong safeguards if you would consider to do this, whether it's domestic or international. I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit how we could move the discussion beyond that principal discussion towards like what it would actually take to do this. So we have obviously the Paris agreement, the crediting mechanism under there. We have the CRCF. So I just wonder what could allow us to have a more concrete discussion, and with that also an evaluation on whether or not this is a feasible option beyond a high-level principle discussion. And then Matt Quinn, if I may, we had on Monday, of course, the agreement between the UK and the EU on greater cooperation. And we really welcome that there is an intent to start negotiations on possible linkage between the two systems. And I just wondered whether you can shed a bit of light in terms of how that process will look like from a new perspective. And Andre, if you want a question for ERCST, I also have one for you, but I don't know if I'm running out of questions that I may ask. But I do think one interesting thing to consider is if you are also looking at how we're shifting, not in terms of emission reductions under the ETS, towards also what that means for imported emissions, because it's great if we decarbonize in Europe, as was mentioned, but how much is that done, as through closures that we are just replacing by importing emissions? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, look, I'm going to actually, I'll give you a short answer, but I'll go to the other. I'm going to Madrid next week because somebody wants me to talk about carbon dumping. So I wasn't sure what carbon dumping was initially, but I think I kind of figured it out. Yes, it's an interesting thing about accounting and how do you account for carbon. These are important things. Let me take a few more questions. I think there was the lady there and the gentleman here.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Yeah, thank you. I actually have a similar question, but for Meta on Article 6, and that's what you think about the integration or use of these credits in the ETS or for the EU's climate target. Thank you.
Okay, don't hate me after this matter. And the gentleman, there's a gentleman here.
Thank you. Tobias Weiss with the Danish Agriculture and Food Council. Well, we represent both companies covered by the ETS and, of course, farmers in the land sector outside. It's interesting to hear how this might be a moment where it's a little bit of a silence before the storm on liquidity in ETS. I mean, we can disagree on when the storm comes, but it's certainly out there in the horizon. So it might be a good time to reflect on a supply of high quality removals. in Europe, because either they can come from outside, from the Article 6 framework, or they could come from inside the EU. And in that sense, of course, there are options from CCS. They're, as we heard, more expensive. But there are also very good options in the land sector. There's biochar. There are options that are associated with the issue of permanence, but there are also short-lived climate gases such as methane. And I mean, might it be possible to anticipate some innovative frameworks where you could have climate credibility and pack some of these removals? That would be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. The gentleman here has been waiting, and I don't think it's fair to make him wait.
Thank you very much. Andre Billy, I'm independent consultant. I have a question specifically for Rosie. Basically, when we look at most of the scenarios and forecasts, very often they are based on allowances and hence on production, whereas in the market, in any market scenario, you have two sides, production, supply and demand. On demand side, we have two major limitations to the price growth, which are on one hand, clean tech, so basically green growth, which would replace carbon intensivity, and on another hand, demand destruction is exactly what our industrial partners now discussed, warning that a too high ETS will drive to a demand destruction. So both elements are somehow not, to my understanding, reflected, and correct me if I'm wrong. And I continue with the question. Over the last 5 years, we have observed quite a close correlation between ETS price and natural gas price. It would be interesting to know what is the percentage of correlation per each of the scenario. I don't say that you have to answer them now, but overall is a point to discussion. What are the percentage of correlation foreseen by different scenario in carbon price? Thank you.
Before coming and going to the panelists, I think that is totally blatantly unfair, because Stefan has been waiting for a long time. Stefan, I apologize to you. You are muted, I think, Stefan. Stefan, you're being muted. So if you unmute yourself, it would be great.
Yeah. No need to apologize. Just a very brief remark, which I think has not been covered so far. I'm getting very involved in the issue of circular carbon strategies. And in my opinion, I think we should get prepared to integrate ETS in a very comprehensive, what I would call carbon management. And I think for that we would need 2 lines of accounting, the current emissions accounting, but in addition also an accounting which monitors carbon that is stored somewhere. And I think what has been put forward so far is just too much fragmented. And for me, I think this would be the next very important step to encourage radical technologies, in particular in the context of cement production and steel production. I think these are what we already observe in the Innovation Fund, which also should be much tighter integrated into this comprehensive carbon management strategies.
Thank you, Stefan. Jean-Yves?
Yes, thank you, Andre. I'd like just to put 2 or 3 remarks as far as the power sector is concerned. We've seen that this year there has been reduction like last year, which is more modest this year, but significantly we have reduction of emission of CO2. From the power sector, they are coming mainly from the increase in solar, the increase in wind power, a little bit increase of hydro, and a strong decrease in coal generation, and also in gas generation. So I think that all that compensates more or less, and we have a table now where the power sector is significantly decreasing over years. This is a rather comfortable situation. But when you put that in perspective with what has to happen in the coming years, you should raise some questions. Because, you know, in the next phase, phase 5, the electricity will be a vector of decarbonization for the industry more and more. Maybe this will not be seen in the next 4 years, but for sure, that will start in the phase 5. So the generation of electricity will increase. And should we have the same decrease in gas and coal, which is rather rapid, in the next period up to 2050? What conditions? Probably coal will disappear rather quickly because when we see the rate over years, it's going rather fast. There will still be some coal in some countries, but this is a trend which is rather strong. When we look to gas, you know, each year we remove almost 26, 30 terawatt-hours of gas. So if we go up to 2040, then we could say, okay, we remove completely gas and we will be renewable. But I don't think that will happen, because you need balancing plants in order to sustain renewable. We don't have the massive storage capacity yet in order to sustain the network and to have security of the network in Europe. So there will be gas, still gas. I don't know at what level, but there will be gas. And if gas is there, that raises the question of CCS. So should we put CCS on gas power plants, which is not the main trend today? So I think that, you know, the target have to be seen. This is my last point. The targets in 2040 and afterwards have to be seen with these technological questions. Should we be able to have a technological pathway that will allow to put CCS on gas power plants, or to have removal credits that will help to go to neutrality as it is forecast in the future? So you know that raises also the question of to open EU ETS to the world. Article 6 is there now, so this is a right question to raise in order to be sure that we can have proper targets and we can move significantly to a decarbonized industry and power sector in the same time.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Yves. I have a gentleman in front of me here. I'll give you the microphone, but just speak closer.
Thanks. Yeah, can you hear me? I'll be very quick. Of course, I'm Giacomo De Angelis. I work for A2A, Italian multi-utility active in the waste manager. We are management. We are the first national operator. And talking about waste, many member states are lagging behind the target of landfill reduction to 10% by 2035. That's why it is widely well seen to that the Commission is evaluating to include in the ETS also landfills. And the question would be, how would that be possible if nowadays we are lacking a methodology to monitor landfill emissions, and the next revision of the monitoring regulation is expected to be 2029? So how would that be possible, and wouldn't then be easier in a way to wait for that revision before including the waste sector in the ETS? Thanks.
Thank you. I can't, you know, you will understand this. I cannot say no to Julia. If not, Dirk will call me.
Thank you. It's Yulia Michalak from International Emissions Association, and I think that was a good intro to ask a question to Mette. So I have a very quick question, Mette, from like 1 to 10. What's the certainty that we'll see a proposal for the 2040 target before the summer break? And another question, also brief, on removals. So we are right now talking about a parliamentary request for the report from the Commission on how to integrate permanent removals into the EU ETS. The report to come by July next year. And it is understood that the Commission is looking at the CRCF and the permanent EU removals. But at the same time, we have this conversation ongoing, especially in the recent weeks or months. It accelerated with regard to Article 6 and opening to removals or credits from international projects being considered for the EU ETS. And we're also discussing that internally with our members. And I'd like to hear your views on how would you see the, let's say, hierarchy on kind of opening up, whether there would be a preference to first explore all removal options within the EU, like nature-based and permanent, or whether would be a preference given to permanent tech removals, first EU and then international and then nature-based, or whether we would rather go for permanent removals, which in the EU means bags, stacks, and biochar, and nature-based removals from international projects. So just to kind of understand how you see this sequence of events of opening up. Thank you.
It's a very easy question. You all okay. Listen, let me go first to Mari, because I think there was one thing addressed to you, and then I'll come back to you and the others.
Thank you so much. These are not easy questions to answer. Let me start off with that. I think on starting off with Article 6, which many of you have touched upon in one way or another, I think it's a very good question, and of course it's a debate that's out there, so we all have to see where it's going. I think what we need to remember on Article 6 is we had fairly recent, we had an agreement on a political level on Article 6. That was only in last year, in the end of last year. There are still many things that are yet uncertain. We don't have the methodologies in place yet. And I think for us, that is the main thing at the moment. I mean, we are very much for Article 6 credits generally, and then the Article 6 markets building them. Our minister was very, very instrumental in negotiating this at the last COP. So we are, of course, very keen on developing the international market, for the international credit market. But we need to ensure the environmental integrity. We need to avoid the mistakes of the past under the Kyoto Protocol. And I think for that reason, we are personally, not personally, we are a little bit concerned about how much we end up doing on this question before we actually have the methodologies in place. Thereby not saying that it shouldn't be included in the future, but for now we simply don't know how it works. We don't know how well we will be able to maintain the environmental integrity. We don't know these things. So I think that's why we are worried about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Like I have to say this since people are beating this one. We did have a session in this. Jake was here and a couple, and Vicente were here a couple of 2-3 weeks ago. I think I can't remember. It was 2-3 weeks ago, in which we talked about international. And at that time, we put the paper on the table with an appendix on it, which outlines some kind of a pilot project. Now, I'm not, we're a think tank and we'll say whatever we want to say, and the regulator will consider, and will do whatever the regulator and the political class will do what they do. We intend to continue that, and there will be a second draft of that based on the comments that we got, and an adjustment to the proposed pilot. But I think that we will all contribute in some way to the debate. AITA obviously it's one of the important players in this because of the experience and the mandate they have. But this is also going to be also on the ball, from my point of view, in the on the table or the email box of those that are industry in the EU. I mean, in the end, it's very unclear to me where does industry stand on this. Do you guys want this or not? Because it's, the CDM was the China Development Mechanism, and there's a lot of opposition to that. So obviously there will be a reaction, and there will be strong reaction from business, whether this is something they want or not. But again, it's not the answer here. The answer will come somewhere else. Mette?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, there were a few questions. Let me start first with the EU UK summit on Monday. Indeed, here it was announced that the EU and the UK will work towards a linking agreement. So this was a step further, or a step we had already in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, that we have on both sides the desire to integrate our ETSs. Now we have also stated this. So I mean, we're working a step closer, but there's still an awful lot of work to be done, and many who can say no to different things on the way. So it's a process we have started. And the process will start with the Commission having to go to the Council and ask for a negotiation mandate. So it will take some time before we move to the next steps. It's not going to happen tomorrow, I can say. It's a process that started. It's a very good process. We are happy that it started, but it will take some time. Then coming back to the issues on the ETS directly, and Article 6, I can maybe continue where Mai was ending. So the question of the use of international credits usually come up together with liquidity, and that was also how you were raising it. And then I come back and say, yes, liquidity is an issue, and we need to address this in the post-2030 ETS, but it's not necessarily international credits that will solve the liquidity issue. We have many other ways. First of all, we have to adjust the EU, the ETS and all the other climate policies to the new 2040 target. So it's very important that we first get a 2040 target. And there I can say, on a scale from 1 to 10, my boss tells me that there will be a proposal for a 2040 target by early summer, so before the summer holidays. So I will say I am loyal, of course, 10. We will come with a proposal as soon as we can, and certainly before the summer for the 2040 target. So yes, and this will of course guide all the proposals on all different climate policies, not only the EU ETS, and that will also have an impact on the liquidity in the longer run, and on the auctioning, and on all the elements that are linked to that. So I would just say on international credits, I have all the same questions that Mai has. If whatever we integrate in the ETS, we always have to make sure that we have a very high quality, and we know that it has the additionality and all the other elements. This is the instrument where we will, instead of paying 70 euros per ton or more, we will take such a removal that we have bought somewhere else. We need to ensure that the removal is really a strong removal. So this is what counts in what we are looking into. And this is also what counts to when you say which removals do we want where. We need, and we know this for 2040 and even more for 2050 and beyond, we need loads of removals. We need some permanent ones, we need some nature-based ones, and we may also need some of them sourced internationally. But when we're looking in the EU ETS, it's very clear we look at those that are permanent, and we are looking at those for the moment, as we can be sure that they are certified well within the EU. We have the carbon removal certification framework that is in place now that will help us a lot. And we are looking very much at how the accounting can be done in a proper manner, because that is really important for this market with such high prices. And then there was also which removals. Yes, the first step in these is that we have to certify the removals and then to ensure that we have the high quality of them. There was also on the carbon management, fully agree, we would very much like to move to a circular carbon strategy, carbon management strategy. Here, it's very important to make sure that we have a proper accounting framework for this. And we have to make sure that we can do this properly. So it's very much linked to including waste incineration or not in the EU ETS, because if we can do that, then we can also go to a midstream or downstream accounting, and then we can ensure that we have also a circular economy of CO2 in the ETS recognized. So it's something that is, of course, a good element we would like to do. We have to show if it's possible. We have to ensure that it's possible in order for it to go ahead. So that's a very strong point. Again, can we account properly? And this moves then to the next issue on landfill. It's also relevant there. Do we have the methodologies to monitor the emissions from landfill? And we are working closely with the EID people and that are going to update the best available techniques and for the accounting. I think it's possible, but it is what we are looking into at the moment. And I think it's always, we do not want in the EU ETS to take any unnecessary risks. So if we see there's risky, then I think it's not something that would be proposed. So this is what we're looking into right now. These were more or less the questions, I think.
Yeah, I will just add what we learned from the 3-hour discussion we had here a couple of 3 weeks ago. And indeed, the sense that we had is that this is, people are apprehensive about international credit, right or wrong. That's what it is. And that maybe troubling the ETS in the first tranche may not be the preferred approach, that maybe you open to in other uses in the EU climate change context as opposed to the ETS, obviously with all the caveats that you've mentioned in terms of quality, but also with quantity guidance and so on, and with strong supervision. So it's quite clear that these are things that are coming out from everybody's intervention. Let me go to Rosie and then I will go to Winston, and then Liana, you have the last word.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So there's quite a few questions there, so I hope I've managed to jot them down and remember them all. But it sounds like you've been reading our latest outlook. So yeah, in terms of your question on the correlation of EUAs with gas prices. So basically, I mean, of course, there's two main reasons why these two are correlated. And when gas prices go high, this means that there's fuel switching to coal and lignite, which means that which are more emission intensive and basically drives up demand for allowances. So in the first quarter of this year, we saw that correlation was relatively high. It was around 80%. And that's why we saw quite a jump up in prices at the beginning of the year. So towards the end of last year, beginning of this year. And I think as well as that being the reason, there's also traders are actively involved in both of these markets. And on Bloomberg side, at least, we've heard of quite a few trading desks, starting up. They have knowledge of the gas market, maybe don't have as much knowledge of carbon markets. So, and they recognize this trend. So it's kind of almost reinforced it. And of course, it makes sense that this would be a price setter for, carbon allowances at the moment, because it's the main, fuel switching is the main technology that is available at the moment. But as we look further ahead, that will shift as coal and lignite are phased out across Europe. And then you also had a question in terms of removals as well. So we've touched on this a little bit, for a few of us have spoken about it now. But yeah, in our latest outlook, we did do an exercise where we modeled removals, which ones we thought would be included. This is obviously, it's a modeling exercise and nothing is set in stone in the policy. So we had to make some, decisions on what we thought could be realistic. But we looked at DAC and BECS as options, because if we look at reforestation, for example, or some other agricultural removals, they are on the cheaper side, whereas DAC and BECS are on the higher side. So In terms of specifically for BECS, that looks like it could be a viable option because it's slightly cheaper. When we looked compared to the EU ETS price trajectory. So, but I think really in terms of what that would mean for EUA prices looking ahead really depends on when they're also included. Because if you include them earlier, then it could be a smoother transition. If you include them at a later stage, you have a build-up of the supply, and it could take a hit on prices. So that was one of the things that we found when we did that modeling. Yeah, I think that hopefully that covers your question. But also when we did this modeling, we looked at Europe specifically. Also very happy to answer specific questions after this as well. In terms of demand destruction, so yeah, we at BNEF, we're quite lucky that we just draw data from other teams across BNEF. So we get that emission trajectory data. It's not something that myself or my colleagues within the carbon team, we actually forecast. It's within BNEF itself, we have specific analysts covering those sectors. So we get our base cases really based on that. But I don't want to step away from this ERCST report too much. But that's where it comes from, and we do some scenarios where we look at demand destruction, particularly considering the geopolitical developments.
Very good. Well, the one thing before I go to Winston and then Liana, I would just want to say, don't rush out. Because it's too bad because there's drinks out there and there's a little reception. So please, I know that you're going to have trouble sitting on that. I know how it feels because I'm having trouble standing up, but it's worth it. These people lay out a good set of things. Winston?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer to a few questions as well. I think one question which maybe has not been yet addressed was I think about the energy demand and the future mix. I mean, when we look at our decarbonization scenarios, it's clear that our electricity demand, for example, will double or even triple when we decarbonize. So it's clear that we will use more power than we are doing today. We think that policy-wise, focus must be on the rollout of renewable energies, including a better network and energy storage. I think energy storage is something which has not been explored enough. And also, by the way, the inclusion of AI can make a huge difference here in terms of how the electricity is being distributed. But it's also clear that we need a base load. And there, I think, I mean, it's not for us to decide, but there for us, it's important to be pragmatic. It's member states who decide about their fuel mix. It's clear that we need to avoid lock-in effects, but I think we need to look at all the solutions and also need to think a bit more long-term. In Germany, for example, we have now discussion around new gas power stations, potentially coupled with CCS, or at least so that they can be coupled with CCS or are in the future hydrogen ready. And that is a discussion which we need to have as well. On the question on circularity and the inclusion of a carbon cycle into the thinking about the ETS, I think here we fully agree. We need to think also about the permanent as well as the non-permanent uses of CO2 in products. I think cement was mentioned, and that's exactly what we do already. So we can, when we capture the CO2, we can actually integrate it back into the concrete production, and we can lock it therein for 100,000 years. But there are also many non-permanent use cases which will need considerably amount of CO2 in the future. If you look at the carbon management strategy of the Commission, it seems that in 2040 all of that demand will be covered by DACs and BECS. We have done another study where we believe that there is still demand for industrial CO2 as well, and here I think the legislation needs to be clarified. It's clear that we need to look at mid and downstream accounting as well, but I think if for example, the waste incinerators would be included in the ETS, then at least we could make sure that the emissions at the end of the life cycle, at least for example for plastics, would be covered as well. And if we talk about fuels that might be not all too circular, that's also more linear. But as I said, also here, I think we need to find a solution because we cannot, even if we capture the CO2 and give it away for methanol production or so, we will have to emit the CO2 in the ETS balance sheet. So we need to pay the CO2 price. But then at least the fuels should be considered as carbon neutral, which they are until 2040. But then according to the delegated act on RFNBOs, not anymore after. So I think we should maybe discuss that as well. And on the carbon removals, I mean, our focus right now is on reducing our direct emissions and not talking about the removals as such, even though, as I said, we have a high biomass mix in our plants as well. So we potentially, when we do CCS, will actually produce carbon removals as well. So we do have an interest that they are integrated into the ETS, and that would support the business case for some of our project. But I fully agree that there needs to be a very strong certification behind it, and that a focus should be on permanent, and that if they are integrated in the ETS, of course, we need to. It's probably not the full integration. It might be a hybrid integration where we make sure that we still differentiate between reductions and removals.
Jana, you have the last word. So just want you can sum also if you wish.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Most of the questions were addressed to Mette, but still we can have a few comments on my side. First of all, regarding removals and international credits, we believe that these can be very important in the coming years, both domestic removals and international credits, given that we ensure robustness and integrity. The question about the carbon management strategies is very important, the way they can support circular carbon strategies, and our transition model will be heavily circular because we are talking about circular renewable feedstock. So it is important for us to have a robust carbon management strategy and to take into consideration the improvements via circularity. It was also mentioned the CBAM and the fact that it is very sector specific. Our sector has not been included in CBAM yet, but we are following very closely, and we believe that CBAM must be reviewed together with ETS in parallel. They are showing the link that we need to review them together. And we should be very careful not to reduce the carbon leakage protection measures until we see that the CBAM is really effective and can support this carbon leakage protection. The parameter of exports that need to be included in CBAM is also very important. The risks of circumvention and resource shuffling also shall be addressed. We should also have an EU-wide harmonized system for the indirect cost compensation. And coming to our sector, in order to expand the scope of CBAM and include our sector, the refining sector and fuel manufacturing sector, we should have a very robust impact assessment for our sector, and I guess for every new sector which is going to be included. And we will also need a fair methodology, which will also be very complicated because of the nature of our industry. Just a few words in order to conclude. I would say that ETS is a great tool, a pioneering tool and policy in EU. We fully support, and the reason is, as I mentioned earlier, because it's market-based, it's based on technology neutrality. But I would say that it is very important not to focus just on decarbonization, because this might mean activity reduction. We should focus on decarbonization in parallel with our focus to incentivize decarbonization and all these breakthrough technologies that will lead us to the climate targets and goals of the EU.
Thank you. There's where it's another discussion for another day, but there's obviously a relationship between the cost, the price of the UN, the cost for decarbonization, and how these two relate to each other, because one of them does incentivize, the other one addresses competitiveness. But this is a discussion for another day. So I want to first thank the panelists that have joined us here today, and again, thank you all for taking the time. Everybody's busy. Also, I would be remiss not to thank those that have participated in putting this report together. It's always a bit of an effort every year. Now we know a little bit how to do it, but nevertheless, it's still an effort. And last but not least, all of you for taking the time and listening to us. The report will be available on the website. There's also the whole deck of slides, which is a much longer deck of slides than what you've seen today, will be on the website, and happy to discuss with you further. And inviting you to make sure that we didn't spend the money for nothing, inviting you for a drink and for a cocktail. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.